Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Miguel Zavala, and I'm an associate professor of teaching at the UCR School of Education. And before we begin with the land acknowledgement, you are here today with the Chicano Latino educational struggles in the Inland Empire. And this is part of the Chicano Latino Heritage Month and the School of Education at UCR. And I will introduce Dennis Lopez in a few. But again, welcome. Thanks for having us here, for being a part of this. And what I want to do, so Dennis Lopez, I'll be interviewing him. It'll be kind of like a plática. But what I want to do is also begin with a land acknowledgement. So I will read this. We would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. So on behalf of the School of Education, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this online webinar entitled The Importance of Hispanic Heritage Month from the School of Ed. I will be serving as a moderator for today's webinar. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to share our mission and the purpose of today's webinar. At the School of Education, our mission is to advance equitable educational systems and practices driven by our core values of equity, evidence, excellence, community, critical thinking, and compassion. It is our goal to develop educational leaders who live out this mission. As an HSI serving institution, the SOE is focused on building institutional capacity to create a culture of servingness. We are committed to serving Chicanx Latinx students and accelerating Chicanx Latinx student success by producing the next generation of researchers, professionals, and educational leaders. In this webinar, we will discuss how our alumni of educational leaders can help carry out the SOE mission from a lens that focuses on serving the Chicanx Latinx student population in the Inland Empire, the IE. Today's event will be devoted to a presentation by our guest speaker, followed by an audience Q&A. So audience members, if you have any questions you would like to pose during the Q&A session, please do not send those via chat, but instead please use the Q&A feature, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. All right, so now it is my honor to introduce our special guest. Dennis Lopez is an SOE Advisory Board member and lecturer emeritus of Chicano Latino Studies, Ethnic Studies, and Latino Sociology at Cal Poly Pomona. He was a lobbyist for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, MALDEF, a national civil rights organization. He was also a consultant to the state's former California Post-Secondary Education Commission, and later served as a consultant to the Intersegmental Coordinating Committee, ICC, an organization that supports access to higher ed. He teaches in a high school in addition to Cal Poly Pomona. Since fall 2016, he has taught at CSU Long Beach's Ethnic Studies course at El Rancho High School in the El Rancho Unified School District. So that's Pico Rivera, for folks who don't know where that's situated, San Gabriel Valley. As such, he supported AB 2016, a law that allows ethnic studies to be taught in California high schools. He has spent much of his career advocating for undocumented immigrant students. As a grant writer for the Inland Empire Scholarship Fund, IESF, he assisted in raising scholarship funds for low-income, high-achieving Chicano Latino students from Riverside and San Bernardino counties. His goal is to help address the needs of the 1.4 million undocumented immigrants that live between Ventura County and the Mexican border. Mr. Lopez has now returned to doctoral study in ethnic studies at UC Riverside with dissertation interest in undocumented Mexicano and Latino student access to California public higher education from 1982 to 2024. He has been an observer of the UCR School of Education since 2006 and became a member of the UCR School of Education Dean's Advisory Committee in 2014. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us here today. So to start off, we have some questions to guide today's webinar. So I'm gonna post these and we'll have it be in the form of, it's kind of, so for participants, we set it up kind of like an interview. I'll have the questions and Dennis is gonna elaborate on these. And I will interject as needed, but it's not necessarily a back and forth. It's more Dennis elaborating on these. So we'll start with the first question. In your experience, what are trends in the educational attainment of Chicano Latino students in the IE you have seen develop over the last several decades that our future and current educators need to address?
Thank you so much, Dr. Zavala, and thank you to Dean Spencer and the School of Education for this opportunity. And of course, all students are equally as important in the endeavor of education. And so that's a given. Another given is that intelligence is equally distributed in the population. What I'll be speaking about are circumstances that deal with the growing Chicano Latino population of the Inland Empire and some of the indices of inequalities that this population experiences in the educational continuum. Now, in this opportunity to speak of these things, it's really wonderful because UC Riverside is a land-grant public university, and as such has a mission to conduct research, produce scholarly publications, provide teaching credentials, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees, and perform community service in the Inland Empire counties of Riverside and San Bernardino. Hispanic Heritage Month is of particular significance. Education is a noble profession that these faculty here and the students in the School of Education and the alumni of the School of Education have embraced. The potential for educators trained at UCR's School of Education continue to make a positive impact in the lives of students, their parents, and their educator colleagues in the present time, and may well pay dividends in our society at large into the future. I believe that UC Riverside School of Education should follow up this webinar with another webinar from UC Riverside School of Education faculty that is already responding to some of the issues that we discuss in this hour, and add recommendations as we discuss part of UC Riverside School of Education's future. The Inland Empire counties have a combined population of 4,687,753 persons. And that population is greater than 25 individual states of the Union. The Chicano Latino population in Riverside County is 51.9% of that county's total, and 55.9% in San Bernardino County. If we look at public school enrollment from kindergarten to 12th grade in these two counties, we find that Chicano Latino students were 67.6% of the total enrollment, according to Ed data in the academic year 23-24. Spanish-speaking English learners in the Inland Empire public schools are 91% of all English learners in this region. While enrollments of Inland Empire public schools are down, the enrollment of Chicano Latino students is up. Statewide, if we look at another system of education, California Community College system, the Chicano Latino student enrollment statewide is 48.3%. At Riverside Community College District campuses, of which there are 3, the total Chicano Latino enrollment is 65.9% of those students. In San Bernardino Community College District, the Chicano Latino enrollment is 64.3%. There are 9 community colleges in the Inland Empire, and I venture to say that the enrollment in the Inland Empire region of Chicano Latino students is well over 50%. The community college system in California is the largest public college system in the country. The Inland Empire County's Chicano Latino population and student enrollments are diverse. The population and enrollments include US-born Mexicans, Guatemalans, Salvadorians, Hondurans, Belizeans, Cubans, Dominicans, and South Americans. The Inland Empire Chicano Latino population includes US citizens, lawful permanent residents, undocumented immigrants, those with deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA designees, others with temporary protected status or TPS designees, mixed immigration status families, which can include in one family US citizens, lawful permanent residents, and undocumented family members. The Chicano Latino population of the Inland Empire includes also monolingual Spanish speakers, bilingual English Spanish speakers, speakers of indigenous languages of the US and Mexico and Central America, monolingual English speakers, first-generation college students, essential workers, as we reflect on our experience with the pandemic. Essential workers helped all of us in our society make it through the pandemic. Some in our community are first-generation college students, farm workers, homeless persons, low-income working poor families, middle-class families, and some wealthy families, biracial families, and multiracial families. So there's great diversity in this Chicano Latino population of the Inland Empire. Some Inland Empire public schools include racially isolated or hyper-segregated schools. Now, we are, 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education decision, but now public schools are more segregated than ever. And according to Dr. Gary Orfield and colleagues' study in 2011 of segregation in the United States, the Chicano Latino student population nationally is the most racially segregated population in public schools. And in the report titled Divided We Fail of 2011, Dr. Orfield and his colleagues found that the most intense levels of segregation occur in the Southern California counties of Los Angeles, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside, San Diego, and Imperial. Furthermore, the characteristics that Orfield and his colleagues found in their report was that not only are these schools racially segregated, but there's concentrated poverty and higher concentrations of English language learners. There are, in some schools, they are hyper-segregated. That is to say, schools with 80 to 100% Chicano, Latino, and African-American students. As I mentioned earlier, intelligence is equally distributed in the population. And we know that there are courageous students and parents and educators that despite some of these indices of societal inequality are still achieving at high levels. But we have to look at these broad statistics to really appreciate the growing need for educators in the Inland Empire. Another indicator would be University of California student freshman admissions eligibility in the Inland Empire public schools. So our region of the Inland Empire is third from the bottom among 7 regions in the state of California, only behind the northeastern and eastern regions of the state. So we fall behind San Diego County, Los Angeles County, and other areas, Orange County, other areas of the state. Next question, Dr. Zavala.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. And I just want to make a quick comment. As you go over this data, as the one that what you mentioned, and some scholars talk about as the community cultural wealth, right? The brilliance that's already latent and present there in the children, the families. And so the other thing is how that community cultural wealth has been generated and in many ways bumps up against like the history of a lot of the structural forms of segregation that have taken place. Because when I was looking at other data, Riverside schools, thinking about college readiness, and one of those metrics is the A through G completion. Um, it's somewhat shocking, but also isn't when we see it historically for the Chicano Latino communities, how you have as high as 65%, even 70% in some high schools, the rate of students that are Chicano Latino not meeting A through G. And so um, when we see it from a community cultural lens frame, when we look at it from the intelligence, the brilliance of communities, we don't move towards a deficit framing of thinking about why are they not all succeeding. But I think what we look at are what are the structural historical conditions that have led to seeing the kind of data that we see today. But I'm going to populate the next question. And this one is, what does it look like for our alumni to create intentional and culturally responsive partnerships across the region to support the outcomes for Latino Chicano students?
Yes, that's a very important question, Dr. Zavala. And, I'm reminded of Dr. A book written by a colleague whose name I can't remember at the moment, Angela Valenzuela, Dr. Angela Valenzuela. She wrote a book that won the top recognition of the Association for American Education Research, AERA, in the early 2000s, called Subtractive Schooling, which gets at what you were talking about, Dr. Zavala, the need for educators to have the awareness of the strengths within students who are bilingual, who perhaps are also in poverty, who are first generation to graduate from high school or graduate from college. And so that book is a wonderful reference. Also, the work of the recently deceased Dr. Luis Moll, who talks about funds of knowledge that these families provide their students with life skills that have a rich background or a fund of knowledge from which they can draw upon. And if educators know about these funds of knowledge that come from the various cultures of Chicanos and Latinos, that they can tap into those funds of knowledge. The relationship between language and culture is powerful. We can carefully examine the data on English language learners. It is important to note that most Spanish-speaking English language learners in California are citizens of the United States of America, including the children of immigrants and the children of U.S. citizens who recognize the importance of bilingualism and support the development of Spanish literacy skills. Many Spanish-speaking English learners, however, fall behind other measures of academic performance in comparison to the general population. And those can include standardized test scores in basic subjects, English, math, for example, A through G course completion rates that you referred to, Dr. Zavala. Now, remember, is what we can find in A through G course completion rates in Ed data, that source of data, only refers to the subject pattern of requirements for the University of California campuses and the California State University. Other components of that of those freshman admissions requirements include that which students have to achieve competitive University of California eligibility, which is higher than the minimum requirements. or for Cal State University campuses, the same competitive admissions eligibility for oversubscribed or impacted majors like engineering, computer science, biology, the arts. So not only the subject requirements that we can see in ed data, where Chicano Latino students have lower rates of completing those courses as high school graduates, but also the other indices, which include, in some instances, test scores, in other instances, the grade point average that you can achieve with the advanced placement and other honors courses. Now, Spanish English bilingual students are also under-enrolled in gifted programs and international baccalaureate programs. There are English language learners who test as proficient in California, yet they're still English language learners. So those students whose first language and home language is Spanish are still English learners, and their teachers need to be well trained in pedagogy and methods to continue to develop those English proficient English language learners to have full and equal access to advanced placement, honors, international baccalaureate, and all the A through G coursework. Dr. Patricia Gándara and Dr. Russell Rumberger's 2002 research for the Williams litigation on inequality in California public schools found that there are many bilingual students who are not identified as English language learners whose teachers need to be trained in providing high quality instruction to those bilinguals in order that those students have full access to the higher order thinking skills courses like advanced placement, honors, and A through G coursework that are used both in the University of California campuses and the California State University systems. Dr. Gándara is co-director of UCLA Civil Rights Project with Dr. Gary Orfield. Many bilingual Spanish English students translate for their parents throughout childhood and into adolescence. Educators need to understand these students' linguistic capacity and further develop their bilingualism as a source for the broader society. For example, there is a growing need for bilingual teachers and administrators, a growing need for medical doctors and nurses, and for lawyers and judges, fire departments, law enforcement, and social service agencies in government from the city, county, state, and federal levels. In addition, there is a need for certified biliterate English-Spanish translators in those same industries as well. For institutions, I also wanted to mention with respect to bilingualism and biculturalism and multilingualism, multiculturalism, there are also Chicano Latino students who are trilingual, that is to say, English, Spanish, and indigenous languages to the United States and indigenous languages from Mexico and Central America. Your next question or comments, Dr. Zavala?
Yeah, no, thank you, Dennis. I think you're hitting on some important pieces when we talk about being culturally responsive, and language is a key thing. And I always think of the contradiction, thinking of first generation immigrant Latino, Latina, Chicano, Chicana students that come right to the States, and then the data on them it's just horrible, seeing how they're underserved. They're the least served students in my view when we look at data in terms of public schools, because often they get kind of disguised under the big pan sort of category of Latino, Latina, right? But imagine if universities were linguistically responsive, right? Because they're not. And so these students, there's a lot of otherness that happens, that identity work that's also racialized in terms of their language, the struggles to access knowledge. But then they come to universities like UCR, but UCR it's run in English, right? And it's not their necessarily language or maternal language. So being culturally responsive, and when you center language as one aspect of that, I think in a beautiful way, it's asking us as a university to step up and create programs that are relevant in those ways and not continue to other them in, let's leave it inadvertently, right? Because de facto, everything that's done is done in the English language, and that's the modus of operandi of how we do it. So,
Yes, I'd like to add to that, Dr. Zavala, by quoting a high school dropout who earned a doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and his name is Dr. Samuel Betances. He's a linguist and a well-known academic in the United States, and he's Puerto Riqueño. He's Afro-Latino, and Dr. Betances said that at a talk, and I'll never forget, in 1984, in the Association of Mexican American Educators Conference in San Jose, California, Dr. Betances said, "We cannot argue in this for the sake of education that it is better to know less than more." And
hmm,
his point there was the value of bilingualism and biliteracy, and the potential for individuals who have that capacity, that, well, everybody has a capacity, but to have those language skills for the entirety of society to help that those monolingual Spanish speakers are able to, through education, be fully integrated into the United States opportunity structure. So it's very, very important. And like I said, Dr. Betances was a high school dropout who had many people believing in him and guiding him to earn a doctorate from Harvard.
yeah, thank you, Dennis. And yes, language, Vygotsky said, is the tool of tools, and I would also add that it's a bridge to cosmologies and epistemologies, and so because people often reduce language to just say in the context of Latino, Latinx students, they're thinking about Spanish, but it's also the cultural and ways of knowing of communities and people, and how do we bridge into that? And I think this emerging thinking about cultural relevance leads us to this. For institutions like UCR, there's a big focus on the university enhancing its servingness for current Chicano Latino students. What does it look like for alumni to utilize servingness in their K-12 institutions?
Well, that's a wonderful question, particularly here at UC Riverside in the School of Education, because this school offers bachelor's degrees, as you know, Dr. Zavala, bachelor's degrees, numerous teaching credentials, including bilingual credentials. It offers master's degrees, Ph.D.s, and EDD doctoral degrees as well. So given the training that UCR School of Education alumni received here at this School of Education, they should be well equipped in understanding and addressing the educational needs of nearly 68% of Chicano Latino students in the K-12 Inland Empire Public Schools. By the way, in the state of California, Chicano Latino students are 55% of the enrollment in the entire K-12 public school system. Former State Assemblyman Jose Medina authored legislation signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom that requires that all California high school graduates have an A through G certified course in ethnic studies to receive a high school diploma by 2030. Now, this law passed a few years ago, and so the California Department of Education, if you look on their website, they have been providing professional development suggestions for schools and school districts. They have been providing curricular frameworks for schools and school districts, and that has been available for a number of years after the passage of that law. And so beginning next academic year of 2025-26, all California high schools should be, or must be, according to the law, must be offering UC A through G recognized certified courses in ethnic studies. And so that will be a great a great asset to the School of Education as you include that in the various degree programs in the curriculum here at the School of Education. Also, the 23 campuses of the California State University system form the largest comprehensive public university system in the United States. And they also train the majority of the teaching workforce in our state. So those who earn doctorates here at the School of Education at UC Riverside may very well become faculty of education in the CSU system, where there are 23 campuses, either as tenured track faculty. In the CSU, upwards of 50% of the faculty are lecturers. They're not on the tenure track. So that's another area of opportunity for those who receive their doctorates and master's degrees here at UC Riverside. Now, graduates of UC Riverside School of Education might also go into administration in the public school system, or in the California State University system, or in any other educational system in California and beyond. By the way, there are 116 California community colleges, and that's the largest public college system in the United States. Here too, School of Education graduates can become faculty or administrators in that system. And of course, there's the public schools, and there are private colleges and universities where graduates of UCR School of Education might take their professional plans into other sectors. Second, the UCR School of Education faculty should develop curricula, produce research, produce scholarly publications, and teach to address the educational needs of this diverse and growing Chicano Latino population in the Inland Empire in K-12 enrollments and community college enrollments. Third, in response to this growing majority student population of the Inland Empire public schools and community colleges, those educators should be benefiting from the research and the publications and the community service of faculty here at the School of Education. So these are the elements, it's just some of the elements that the current students in the School of Education and alumni who return, if they got their bachelor's degree, they could return for a teaching credential. If they got their bachelor's degree teaching credential, they can return for the master's or the doctorate. So there's so many, this UCR School of Education is a wonderful opportunity for those alumni to return to.
Thank you, Dennis. And I just want to add, because my work has been in preparing teachers to teach ethnic studies, and sometimes people think of it as just content, but when we look at what is foundation, or at least some of its tenets, it's one, reclaiming cultural identities, doing that kind of healing work, as some of us call it in the classroom. And the other is this building and rerouting in who we are, especially for Chicano Latino students. And so what's beautiful is we already have a pipeline of ethnic studies teachers coming through UCR. So we're seeing those first generations of pipelines working on into the schools, that we eventually seed all of what you're saying, the policy changes that are happening, making it a requirement. And I just think that's a very concrete way that UCR is already a part of being responsive, solving problems for Chicano Latino students. But, and I like what you're doing, you're laying the big sort of, like, if we look at state institution structures, education, higher ed, it's a big, big machinery. But how do we align it? So the question of ethnic studies is, how do we get all the other fields? For example, if I'm in the sciences, how do we get ethnic studies there? If I'm in mathematics, how do we get ethnic studies there? Or at least these principles of how we reroute and why that's important. But I want to move into this last question. How can UCR alumni and UCR representatives, here faculty and administrators, better serve the Chicano Latino community?
I'm really anxious to get to that, Dr. Zavala, but let me just add on to what your comments that you just made. I know for myself, and I know I would expect for you as well. There are many Caucasian educators, African American educators, Asian American educators, Native American educators that have mentored you and I, that have guided you and I, that have joined in with equal commitment in education that we have had, you and I. And so just to give you concrete examples that are known to many others. Um, if you've not viewed the movie Stand and Deliver, you see that Jaime Escalante, may he rest in peace, was able to bring students from a barrio high school in East LA, Garfield High School, to achieve passing grades, excellent grades in advanced placement in calculus. In the movie Stand and Deliver, it was a real life story. And so he was able to 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 um, to get those students to get 3, 4s, or 5s, the maximum score 5 on the advanced placement course. The College Board didn't believe it and had the students retake the test. And the movie Stand and Deliver is beautiful because it shows that they retook it and they achieved the same scores, 3, 4s, and 5s. And they did that for 7, 8, 9 consecutive years as Jaime Escalante was teacher there. I know in my own background, one of my greatest mentors, friends, was a Chinese American woman by the name of Linda Wang. I met Linda because she agreed to meet with me. She was, at the time that I met her in the early 1980s, she was the Immigrant Rights Program National Director for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And so I went to her because I didn't understand the disjuncture between immigration law and educational law that made undocumented immigrant students not eligible to go to college, even though many of them had all the requirements. So here she is, a Chinese American woman, Dr. Dennis Galagani, who was, when I met him, an assistant vice chancellor at UC Irvine, went on to be an assistant vice president for the University of California Office of the President. He was a great mentor, Italian American. And so we have many mentors from other ethnic backgrounds who understood our quest for education. And so while we know that we're focused in this discussion on the needs of Chicano Latino students, as everybody in California high schools takes ethnic studies, they will become more familiar, not only with Chicanos and Latinos, but with other ethnic groups. So I'm saying it benefits everyone. It will benefit every student in the California State University system, a separate law that was passed and signed by Governor Newsom to require for bachelor's degrees, whether it's biology, computer science, dance, English, all majors within the largest public university system in the country, the California State University. In order to graduate, they too must have a California State University Ethnic Studies course, and that's throughout the 23 campuses. So I just wanted to make that point that ethnic studies is for everyone, and ethnic studies helps all of us understand, as you know. In fact, I have your book, Dr. Zavala, on teaching ethnic studies. It helps our entire society just become more aware of the history and the achievements and the struggle of people of color in the United States and in California. I'm sorry, so we can go on to the next question.
No, no worries, Dennis. I mean, it's important to story and contextualize, right? And it's sets of questions here. This one's, I guess, broader is how the UCR alumni and also representatives, faculty, administrators, how can we better serve the Chicano Latino community in the IE? And we'll
Again,
have,
yeah, okay,
and
go
sorry,
ahead.
Dennis, we'll have about maybe 5 minutes for this, and then there's
Wonderful.
a lineup of beautiful
Okay.
Q&A questions.
Okay, so I'll be a little more brief with this one. You know, we're so blessed, if you will, to be here at UC Riverside, where there's 50 years of history of the campus responding to the Chicano Latino community in, for example, Chicano student programs. They have programs for high school students to welcome high school students. They have programs for transfer students, for Chicano Latino transfer students. They have linked up with the Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Project out of Sacramento, a statewide project, and now here on campus there is a shorter version of that 8-day program. It's a 2-night and 3-day program here for the Inland Empire. The campus has linked with the University of California Puente Project for community colleges that incorporate Chicano Latino authors in the pre-transferable English courses, connected with the same faculty and with the same counselor to these students that come through in cohorts. Well, the Puente Project, the UC Puente Project, it's a collaboration with community colleges. They've had conferences here at the Riverside campus. Undocumented student programs, part of the University of California system-wide initiative to reach out to Chicano Latino students who are the undocumented immigrants and to help them. There's even immigration counsel available to the students and their families through the undocumented student service programs. The undocumented student programs also have outreach to high schools and community colleges. Being here in the Inland Empire, we can partner with the Parent Institute for Quality Education, PIQUE, which has been a statewide organization for 37 years, developing curriculum for parents whose children will be the first generation to go to college. And they're operating in 36 schools of the Inland Empire, and they're trying to expand to more. Again, they offer a wide array of parent education classes for those parents, some of them monolingual English, Spanish speakers, some of them bilingual from all ethnic groups, but they have served parents in a broad array of parent education programs. And there's the Inland Empire Future Leaders. It's been going on for over 40 years, developed for 8th and 9th grade Chicano Latino students. It's a nonprofit organization. And some of the alumni include a gentleman with 3 graduate degrees from Harvard, and who is now a member of the United States Congress, Dr. Raul Ruiz, who is from Coachella and now represents Coachella in the United States Congress. Also, former mayor of Redlands, who is now part of the leadership in the Congress of the United States, Pete Aguilar. So these are some of the alumni that were 8th and 9th graders that were in the Inland Empire Future Leaders program that's been going on for over 40 years. There's also the Inland Empire Youth Leadership Collaborative. These are undocumented and documented immigrants who are addressing the needs of immigrants. And these are youth addressing the needs of immigrants in the Inland Empire. There's the California Association of Bilingual Educators, CABE, and there are many members at the school site level in all elementary, middle school, high school, in school district offices that are members of CABE, and that's an organization that's been around for almost 50 years. So we have so many assets right here on campus and in the Inland Empire that we can call upon. So I hope that the School of Education follows up this webinar with faculty who are responding to these needs and to these are partnering with these assets on campus and in the community, and then who can articulate the School of Education's plan to incorporate the issues we've talked about in the future. So I'll refer to you now, Dr. Zavala, and the questions.
Yeah, gracias, Dennis, and participants. Thank you. Feel free to add questions in the Q&A, and in this segment, we'll dedicate time to that. So, Dennis, I'll read this first question. So it's a quotation, right? The quote is, "The Chicano Latino student population is the most segregated community in education," unquote. And so this person's asking me, you please elaborate on this more. Is this segregation in educational and financial resources? Is this racial segregation? All of the
Yes.
above.
It's all of the above. And Dr. Orfield and his colleagues at the UCLA Civil Rights Project noted that the segregation in the 21st century in public schools is, as we've known it, racial segregation. It's not by law. It's because, as Dr. Orfield noted in his book, Dismantling Desegregation, the Supreme Court, which has evolved over the years to be a supermajority now of very conservative justices. The Supreme Court since 1978 has dismantled the legal structure for protections of desegregation to the absurd point where according to rulings of the Supreme Court, racial data could not be used to desegregate, even when white majority populations have supported voluntary desegregation in Seattle and in Kansas City. The Supreme Court struck down the use of racial data. It was the federal courts. And if you have a chance to refer to Dr. Jack Peltison's book, 58 Lonely Men, his book in the 1960s chronicled the federal judges who administered desegregation in the South. And the South became, by mid-1970s, the most desegregated public schools in the country. But with rulings since the late 70s and through the 80s, 90s, and the early 20th century, they have, as Dr. Orfield noted in Dismantling Desegregation, done just that. The Supreme Court has dismantled the legal protections. Now, the school segregation in public schools is racial segregation, concentrated poverty, and high concentration of English learners. So it's not that English learners are intellectually deficient or that poor students are intellectually deficient. That's not the case. What is the case is that we as an educational system have not developed the pedagogy, we've not developed the methods, the strategies, and we've not sustained those for the entirety of our schools in such a way that all students, whether they're in poverty or whether they're English learners, can be fully integrated into quality education. So that's our challenge. And so, yeah, school segregation, in short, is more complex than we've often recognized. And again, there are heroic examples of, despite all of this systemic inequality, where low-income and English language learners are succeeding, but those cases are proportionately very few and not what they should be in a country where we're all created equal. And so I think we've got a lot of work, and the Inland Empire is a wonderful place where we can work together on dealing with the reality of school segregation and providing quality education for all students.
Thank you, Dennis, on that. And I just want to add a little bit of kind of historicize the question of segregation. And there are, Chicano and some Mexicano scholars who have talked specifically, I'm referring here because Latinx, Latino, Latinx is a very large encompassing, but I want to think specifically Mexicano, Chicano communities and familias, thinking about the last 400 years at least, right? The colonial period and the phenomena of congregaciones, the term to congregate. And
Mm,
there was also with that concomitant with the colonizers' way of creating a form of enclosure of bodies that were then, created to labor for, was the spiritual reductions or reducciones. And
mhm.
I just want to mention it's like a lot of what we see today as concentrations of poverty, whatever signifiers we're using, there's a longstanding, at least 400-year legacy history of that enclosure of a segregation. And I think it often doesn't get discussed in a lot of the educational work. So we think about it as the education in the US as perhaps, or in the US Southwest, as an extension of the colonial logics that have unfolded or tied to those contradictions. To me, it's not surprising. But what tends to happen is aspects of segregation, either thought of as residential, it's thought of as happening in schools, but we don't see that longer historical trajectory of what's happened to Chicano, Mexicano students. And but then it's this next question, if you talked about emergent kind of bilingual students, and I will read the question. It says, I would like to know how we can support our bilingual, and here specifically they write Spanish, English students within the K-12 education system and at the university level who want to use their linguistic assets, native home language of Spanish and English. Would you have any advice for current and or future education policymakers and educators?
Yes, fortunately, there's a growing research literature on dual language immersion programs. Um, unfortunately, in 1996, the majority of California voters voted to end much of bilingual education with Proposition 227. Well, we saw that that did not improve education for English learners or bilingual students. But what did emerge was a growing recognition among parents, be they Spanish-speaking parents or English-speaking parents or speakers of other languages, who understand that bilingualism, as Dr. Samuel Betances said, we can't argue for the sake of education. It's better to know less one language than more two languages. So dual language immersion, the concept is that students receive instruction in their native language and in English, so that for example, Spanish-speaking students, the monolingual Spanish-speaking students are given content in English, and in the same classroom, in the same dual immersion program, English-speaking students are given content in Spanish. So we have Spanish-speaking students learning English in class, not pulled out of class, but in class instruction is in English and Spanish, or English and the second language. And so if a student is able to be sustained through their elementary school experience in this dual immersion, they end up being bilingual, bicultural, and biliterate in terms of the Spanish speakers learning English, the English speakers learning Spanish, receiving the content in the disciplines, English, in math, in science, in history. The content areas are offered in both languages. And if the student can continue in the dual immersion programs, they are able to exit those programs fully bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural.
Gracias, Dennis, and thank you, participants, for your questions. We have another question here, and I'll read this. What is the responsibility of the School of Education and UCR more broadly to study the impact of warehousing and logistics capital on the quality of education of Latino students in the region?
Yes, well, another colleague here at UC Riverside in fact in ethnic studies, Dr. Alfonso Gonzalez, wrote a book that I think was published in 2013, where he talked about that very issue, that even back 10 years ago or more, the growth of the logistic industries, the warehousing, because we are near two of the world's largest ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach. And we are connected by rail and by trucking to the rest of the country. So there is, this is one of the pivotal distribution points. So, and in the empire, the land is cheaper and more readily available than in San Diego County, Orange County, Los Angeles County. And so you have all these broad factors that have made the warehousing industry grow exponentially in the 21st century in the Inland Empire. And as Dr. Gonzalez chronicled in his book, that the warehouses are often located in near areas of concentration of low-income Chicanos, Latinos, Mexicanos. And so we have traffic congestion just of cars, of the huge semi trucks. We have the warehouses, and all of that brings environmental problems along, like the state freeway 60, the 15, Interstate 15, Interstate 10, all of the state and interstate freeways that crisscross our region. And so the health effects of the air pollution are just weighing heavily, perhaps even most heavily, on the Chicano Latino barrios throughout this region. So it is a factor, and of course, it has terrible health outcomes for the residents, the students, their parents, and so this has an impact, of course, on their education. So yes, the growing warehousing industry, and the fact that in our economic system in the United States, the profit motive many times, if not most times, if not always, outweighs the public interest of healthful areas, and because this is really felt heavily on everybody, but in particular in the barrios throughout the Inland Empire.
And thank you, Dennis. And to add to this, it's just been an area of mine, looking at like labor histories, but the way I've seen in places like East LA, but also as I'm becoming familiar with the IE, the discourse framings of market logics, like career readiness, industry needs, those rhetorics and frames are bumping up against notions of educación, of socially dreaming next generations of our children to be educated. Because under neoliberal economic logics, education is it's become a commodity. And so I think thinking about this question is probably the question that's going to push us as a school of education and also university to think about the political economy. What are those contradictions? Education cannot be seen in isolation anymore. And I just bring this story, the pressures familias are getting and the rhetorics about don't go to the university, just get this job, right? It's too expensive. And those become, in my view, I'll own that, in my view, it's a kind of trap because we're historically not quite where we need to be as comunidades. But I want to say, just unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Dennis, for your presentation, for answering all these questions. And, gracias, Dennis. Hopefully we'll be connecting some more. And thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. You can learn more about UCR's School of Education events like this one by visiting education.ucr.edu. Also, SOE alumni are invited to the SOE Homecoming Unit event next week on Saturday, November 2nd. To learn more, visit homecoming.ucr.edu. We look forward to seeing you at future SOE events. Until then, goodbye. Gracias, Tlazocamate.
Adios.